Look up at the rock. See that pale band of bleached stone stretching 150 feet above the water? Chalk white. Dead, it rings the entire lake like a bathtub someone forgot to scrub. Every foot of that white is water that used to be here. Water that's gone. Stand at that exact spot in the year 2000, and you'd have been standing on the bottom of the lake, with the surface soaring more than 100 feet over your head. That's not erosion. That's a receipt. Lake Mead, the largest reservoir in the United States, the beating water heart of the American Southwest, has been draining for 25 years straight. And somewhere in the last stretch, quietly, with no siren, no headline, no president standing at a podium, it slipped past a line the engineers who poured this concrete in the 1930s genuinely believed the lake could never reach. Not unlikely. Not worst case. Impossible, that's the word they used. So here's the first thing I need you to hold on to, because I'm going to answer it. Just not yet. What actually happens the moment 40 million people are downstream of a dam that can no longer do its job? Not the drama version, the mechanical version, the plumbing of it, because it's stranger and colder than you think. And here's the second thing, the one that kept me up. Everyone talks about the day the water runs out, but the terrifying part isn't the day it runs dry. It's a day that comes long before that. A day when the lake is still full of water you can see, water you could swim in, water stretching all the way to the horizon, and yet the whole system has already died. How can a reservoir be full and finished at the same time? Sit with that. I'll bring you back to it. For now, the numbers. Brimming. Lake Mead holds roughly 26 million acre-feet of water. An acre-foot is enough to cover a football field a foot deep, about 326,000 gallons. Now scale that up 26 million times. That's the tank. That's the savings account the West has been living off of. And as I'm telling you this, that account sits near a third full, 30-something%. The surface has fallen into the low 150s of feet above sea level, when a healthy Mead sits up near 1/220. Do the math on that drop and it'll floor you. The lake has lost enough water to bury the entire state of Connecticut. Gone, evaporated into the desert sky, or piped away to lawns in Las Vegas and almond groves in California's Central Valley. Here's the cruel genius of it, though. The lake didn't fall off a cliff. It's slow. It's patient. It moves at the speed of a receding hairline. You don't notice day to day, and then one morning you look in the mirror and something's just gone. Marina operators noticed first. Out at the Boulder Basin, the marinas have been picked up and dragged toward the center of the lake so many times the docks basically have wheels now. Boat ramps that used to drop you straight into deep water end, and a long concrete tongue that runs out into cracked mud, and beyond that, a walk. Sometimes, a very long walk. At some ramps, the water's now so far from the pavement that the National Park Service just closed them. Shut the gate. Nothing left to launch into. And the lake started coughing up what it swallowed. As the water pulled back, it revealed the bones underneath. A World War II era landing craft, a Higgins boat, surfaced from the depths, hadn't seen daylight in decades. Then came the darker finds. Human remains inside a rusted barrel, exposed on the new shoreline. Then another set of remains. Then another. The receding water turned the lake bed into an open-air cold case file, because Mead had been hiding those bodies under the surface the whole time, and the surface was leaving. That's what point of no return looks like when it starts. Not a wave, a revelation. Let me step back, though, and show you the sheer weight resting on this one lake, because until you feel it, none of this lands. Lake Mead and its upstream twin, Lake Powell, together supply water to roughly 40 million people across 7 states: Arizona, California, Nevada, Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, Wyoming, plus a slice of Mexico. That's 1 in 8 Americans drinking, bathing, and flushing on water routed through this system. It irrigates something like 5 million acres of farmland. the lettuce in your winter salad, the alfalfa feeding dairy cows, the winter vegetables filling grocery stores from December to March. A huge share of that grows on Colorado River water, and Mead is the toll booth it all passes through. Then there's the dam itself. Hoover Dam. That gray Art Deco monolith wedged into Black Canyon, 726 feet of concrete holding back the whole lake. Its turbines spin on the pressure of the water stacked up behind them, powering something like 1.3 million people across 3 states. The higher the lake, the harder the water pushes, the more power comes out. Drop the lake, the power drops with it. Drop it far enough, and the turbines simply stop. And here's the part nobody put on a plaque when they finished this thing in 1936. The men who built Hoover Dam were solving a flood problem. The Colorado used to rampage, spring floods that tore through farmland, then bone-dry stretches that left the same farmland cracking. The dam was supposed to tame that river, store the wet years, ration them out through the dry ones. It was an act of pure American confidence. Concrete over chaos. They designed it around numbers. And those numbers, it turns out, were a lie. Not a malicious one. An optimistic one. A wishful, once-in-a-generation, we measured during the wettest stretch in centuries kind of lie. Everyone who signed the paperwork in 1922 promised out more water than the river has ever reliably carried. They divided a pie smaller than the slices they cut. So when people ask me how Lake Mead ended up here, 150 feet of dead white rock, closed ramps, bodies in barrels, a savings account bleeding out, the honest answer is that the crisis didn't start with the drought. It started with a signature on a document more than a century ago, drafted by men who never imagined the water they were counting simply wouldn't show up. And to understand how a piece of paper doomed a lake, you have to go back to the room where they signed it, Santa Fe, New Mexico. November 1922. 7 men in wool suits, hunched over a table in the palace of the governors, arguing about a river most of them had barely laid eyes on. Herbert Hoover ran the room. He was Commerce Secretary back then. And the states downriver? Terrified California was booming, growing fast. And the slower states, Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, New Mexico, feared that under the old doctrine of first in time, first in right. Los Angeles would just grab every last drop before the mountain states could build a thing. So they made a deal. Split the river down the middle. Upper Basin gets 7.5 million acre-feet a year. Lower Basin gets 7.5 million acre-feet a year. Fair, clean, symmetrical. One problem. The number was made up. They based that 15 million acre-feet on flow records from roughly 1905 to 1922. And those years happened to be some of the wettest the Colorado had seen in 5 centuries. Tree rings would prove it later. Scientists drilled into ancient bristlecone pines and cottonwoods all across the basin and reconstructed the river's flow going back more than 1,000 years. What they found should have killed the whole project on the spot. The long-term average isn't 15 million acre-feet. It's closer to 13, maybe 14. And during the brutal medieval megadroughts, it dropped far, far lower for decades straight. So the founders didn't overpromise by a hair. They handed out water that, on average, was never in the account in the first place. Then, they piled on Mexico's share in 1944, another 1.5 million acre-feet, locked in by treaty. Then, Arizona and California hauled each other to the Supreme Court and fought for years over who got what. Then, the tribes, whose senior water rights predate every single signature on that page, started demanding the water that had been legally theirs the whole time. Every new claimant sliced off another piece of a pie that was already imaginary. Here's why that matters right now, tonight, while you're watching that bathtub ring climb. For most of the 20th century, the overallocation didn't sting. Nobody actually drank their full paper share. The upper basin was empty, a few ranches, some mining towns, nowhere near enough people to swallow 7.5 million acre-feet. so the surplus rolled downstream, filled Lake Mead in the 1930s, filled Lake Powell in the 1960s, and everyone downstream, Vegas, Phoenix, the Imperial Valley farms growing half of America's winter lettuce, just kept taking. The debt sat on the books, but the checks kept clearing because the account still had a cushion. That cushion was the reservoirs, two of the biggest man-made lakes on Earth, holding years of supply in reserve. And for decades, that buffer kept the lie invisible. Then the West filled up. Phoenix exploded from a dusty town into the fifth largest city in the country. Las Vegas went from 25,000 people to over 2 million in the metro. Denver, Salt Lake, Albuquerque, all growing, all thirsty, all finally creeping up on the paper water they'd been promised a century back. The upper basin started building. The demand curve climbed toward the supply line, and right as those two lines were about to touch, the sky shut off. Hydrologists say the modern drought began in the year 2000. Except drought is the wrong word, and I want you to get why. Because the difference is everything. A drought is temporary. You wait it out. Aridification is permanent. A hard shift to a hotter, drier baseline that doesn't lift when the next storm blows through. Study after study now calls what's happening in the Colorado Basin the worst megadrought in at least 1,200 years. Not the worst anyone remembers. The worst since the year 800. And the fingerprints of a warming climate are all over it. Because temperature is the multiplier nobody wrote into the math in 1922. Heat the air, and three things happen at once, and each one steals water. Snowpack melts earlier, so the runoff arrives while the ground's still frozen and can't drink it in. More of that runoff evaporates straight off the reservoir before anybody can touch it. Lake Mead alone loses staggering volumes to the desert sky every single year, water that just vanishes into thin air. And the parched soil itself soaks up more of the snowmelt before it ever reaches the river. You can have a solid snow year now and still watch the river come up short, because the warmth eats the gains before they even get there. That's the cruel twist. It's not just that less snow falls. It's that the snow that does fall gives back less water than it used to. The numbers stopped being abstract in a hurry. By 2021, the Bureau of Reclamation declared the first ever official water shortage on the Colorado River. Arizona took the first hit, 512,000 acre-feet, gone, right out of the state supply. Farmers in Pinal County, who'd grown cotton and alfalfa on that water for generations, watched their allocations zeroed out. Fields went fallow. Wells got drilled deeper, into groundwater that's also draining away. In 2022, it got worse. Tier 2A, more gone. And Lake Mead kept falling. Summer of 2022, it dropped to around 1,040 feet above sea level, its lowest since the reservoir first filled in the 1930s. That's when the lake started coughing up its secrets. The receding water exposed a sunken World War II-era landing craft. It exposed the intake structures the water managers had frantically rebuilt lower and lower over the years, chasing the surface down like a bathtub emptying faster than you can drop the drain. And it exposed the barrels. Human remains, at least one with a gunshot wound, stuffed in a corroded drum and dumped decades ago. When the mob still ran the strip, and the lake was deep enough to swallow anything, the desert was handing back its dead. Now follow the elevations down with me, because this is where it stops being history and turns into a countdown. Lake Mead sits behind Hoover Dam, and that dam isn't just a wall. It's a power plant feeding electricity to roughly 3 million people across Nevada, Arizona, and California. But hydropower needs a certain water level to work. Drop below about 1,050 feet, and the turbines start losing efficiency. Slide toward 950 feet, minimum power pool, and Hoover Dam can't reliably make electricity at all. The dam still stands. The lake still holds water. But the machine that turns that water into light goes dark. And below even that, at 895 feet, you hit the two words that keep water managers up at night: dead pool. The elevation where water can no longer pass through the dam's outlets, the Colorado River, below Hoover Dam, would basically stop. Not slow. Stop. The water that feeds Southern California's aqueducts, that fills the canals of the Imperial Valley, that runs the taps in Phoenix and Tucson, the physical ability to send it downstream simply ends. 40 million people, and the pipe goes dry right at the source. That's the scenario. And here's the twist that should chill you. The failure doesn't unfold in the order you'd expect. You lose the electricity long before you lose the water. The lights on the strip flicker out while there's still 150 feet of water sitting in that reservoir. Power and delivery live at different elevations, so the region loses its hydroelectric backbone first. And that same power is part of what runs the pumps that move water in the first place. The system starts eating itself. For decades, the reservoirs hid the 1922 lie. Deep enough to soak up the overdraft. Deep enough that nobody had to admit the arithmetic never worked. But a buffer only buffers until it's gone. And every foot that white ring climbs up the canyon wall is another foot of margin spent. Another year of borrowed time cashed out, pushing Mead closer to the elevation where the promises made in that Santa Fe room finally slam into the river that never agreed to keep them. So what actually happens the day Mead crosses that line? Forget the Hollywood version. The real one is slower, quieter, and worse. Start with the farms. Arizona's Central Arizona project sits at the very bottom of the priority ladder, which means when the cuts come, they land there first, and they land hardest. Pinal County growers already watched their allocation vanish. Cotton fields left fallow. Dust where alfalfa used to grow. Now shift west. The Imperial Valley in California holds the oldest, most senior rights on the entire river, roughly 3.1 million acre-feet a year, more than Arizona and Nevada combined. And that one valley grows a startling share of the winter lettuce, broccoli, and spinach that lands on American plates from December to March. Squeeze that supply, and you don't just hurt a few farmers. You raise the price of a salad in Chicago, you empty a shelf in Toronto. The Colorado River feeds close to 15% of the country's food, and the moment the water stops moving, the shockwave doesn't stay in the desert. Then the cities: Phoenix, Tucson, Las Vegas, chunks of Los Angeles and San Diego, all leaning on this one river. Vegas got clever early. They drilled a third intake straw deep beneath the reservoir, the so-called third straw, so the city can keep drinking even if Mead drops below the old pipes. Engineering brilliance. It's also an admission. You don't spend $1.5 billion building a drain at the bottom of a lake unless you genuinely expect that lake to keep falling toward it. Vegas planned for a future where Mead is nearly empty. And that tells you exactly what the people closest to the numbers actually believe. Here's the part that keeps water managers up at night. The cuts aren't linear. They cascade. Lose hydropower at Glen Canyon upstream, and the money that funds Colorado River programs, the endangered fish recovery, the salinity control, the basin-wide management, that revenue evaporates too. Because it was paid for by selling the electricity those turbines made. Kill the turbines, and you kill the budget that manages the crisis. The tool breaks at the exact moment you need it most. And then there's Hoover. That wall of concrete outside Vegas generates power for roughly 1.3 million people across Nevada, Arizona, and California. At full pool, the water pressure drives 8 turbines on each side of the canyon. But drop the elevation, and every single foot steals efficiency. Less head, less push, less electricity, until you hit the floor where the blades can't turn at all. The dam still stands. The lake still holds water you can see. But the machine that justified building it in 1935 goes silent. A monument to a river that outlived its own arithmetic. Now, who blinks first? That's the ugly question sitting underneath all of it. The lower basin states and the upper basin states have been circling each other in negotiation rooms for years, past deadline after deadline, because the compact that started this whole mess has no honest mechanism for shortage. It divided a surplus that was never there. So when the shortfall arrives, there's no agreed rule for who gives up what. California points at Arizona. Arizona points at the treaty. Everyone points at Mexico's 1.5 million acre foot share, promised way back in 1944. And the tribes, the ones with some of the oldest legal claims on the entire system. Water rights affirmed by the Supreme Court decades ago, and still not fully delivered, sit in a maddening spot, holding paper rights to water that physically isn't in the river anymore. That's the trap of a point of no return. It isn't a wall you smash into. It's a slope you slid down while everyone argued about whose fault the slope was. Walk out to Government Wash on the Nevada side and you can read the whole story right on the rock. That pale mineral crust, the bathtub ring, is calcium carbonate baked onto the canyon walls by water that used to sit there year after year, evaporating and leaving its fingerprint behind. In 2000, the ring barely existed. The lake nearly kissed the top. Today that band stretches over 150 vertical feet, taller than a 12-story building, and it keeps growing upward like the world's slowest, cruelest measuring stick. Every inch of exposed white is a receipt. Proof of water that was here and isn't coming back on any schedule that matters to the people living now. Look closer, and the ring stops being scenery. It becomes a clock. Read it from the bottom up, and it counts the years the West spent water it didn't have. Read it from the top down, from the water line that's still falling, and it counts what's left before the promises made in that Santa Fe hotel room in 1922 finally collide with the river that never signed the deal. The buffer that hid the lie for 100 years is measured, right there, in stone. And it's almost spent. Go stand at the old Boulder Harbor launch ramp, the one built to slide boats into open water. Follow the concrete down. It just runs out. Not into the lake, into cracked mud, then into pale flats where fishing boats sat 40 years ago, then into open desert. A boat ramp that ends in dust. The horizon where the water used to reach is now just more horizon. Dry ground running out toward a shimmer that used to be a lake and is now mostly air and heat and the ghost of a shoreline drawn on the rock above. 40 million people still turn on their taps every morning downstream of that ramp. The water still comes. For now. That's the strange suspended quiet of a crisis in its final stage. The lights are on. The sprinklers still hiss at dawn. The lettuce still ships north, while the number on the gauge slides lower and the white ring climbs higher, and the one river holding it all together keeps insisting on the only truth it ever told. There was never as much water as we promised, and the ledger always comes due.